Dead cops. That's what you heard. America's a land where people are not only allowed to protest, but are encouraged to speak up for what they believe in and seek to force positive change. But a protest this weekend in Manhattan, tied to recent police shootings, did more to show how far we must go as a society for not just racial equality, but understanding the role of law enforcement for everyone of every color. He is the national spokesperson for CORE, the Congress for Racial Equality, activist, tireless speaker on behalf of those who seek reality and civil rights. Niger Innis joins us here on MidPoint. Niger, good to talk to you again.
Great to be on with you, as always.
Niger, here we go. In Manhattan this weekend, those were the calls. Dead cops. As a matter of fact, they went back and forth down the streets, and they said, what do we want? Justice. What do we want? Dead cops. And that's, come on, Niger. This has got to stop sooner or later here, because people are allowed to protest. But doesn't this show that this whole movement, if you will, is being hijacked and being taken in a position that will make it less for everybody involved, of every color?
Can you spell the phrase Occupy Wall Street? Because that's what I believe is involved here. I think you have a collaborative endeavor where the people, the three different entities I speak of, are not necessarily purposefully or voluntarily collaborating with one another, but they are, in fact, coinciding. And one is the most innocent piece. The most innocent piece are folk that are legitimately frustrated about a tension between police and community relations, okay? They have legitimate grievances, they have legitimate rights, and they want to exercise their First Amendment rights. So that's one group, and they're innocent. But you have this group of anarchists, George Soros, Tom Steyer, funded big left-wing liberal anarchist types that fund these efforts like Occupy Wall Street that have largely hijacked.
Well, let's do this, Nigel. Let me stop you there. How can you connect those people you just mentioned to these? Can you give us some evidence?
Well, evidence. I have one piece of evidence I just saw this morning in Brookline, and it's not just in Brookline.
Brookline, Massachusetts. You're talking about.
That's right, Brookline, Massachusetts, but also in the Bay Area, out in Berkeley. You know, most of those protests, many of them that got violent, were of whites. They weren't even blacks. You know, supposedly this is supposed to be a protest for Black Lives Matter, and how is it that the overwhelming majority of the protesters, and almost exclusively those that have recently gotten violent, not in Ferguson, because in Ferguson they were black gangbangers, but in places like the Bay Area and Brookline and and New York City, most of these folk are not even black people.
Well, it is fair to say that people of all color are the ones who want some sort of justice here, right? It doesn't have to just be black.
No, and I would include white and other non-black in that first group that I mentioned of people that have legitimate grievances and want. They may be misguided, but they're innocent in terms of what they want done. But there's a difference between those elements and the elements of the Occupy Wall Street crowd. Look, I was on the station of CNN with one of the more prominent advocates for the protesters, and he was telling me behind scenes that Occupy Wall Street is definitely involved and embedded in many of these protests. But there's a third factor. The third factor is the Obama administration. Obama himself and other political elements with his administration that were depressed after they got their butts handed to them in the last election, and they have made a decision. They're going to make a concerted effort to rally the base by whatever means necessary. They did it with executive amnesty with Latinos, and they're doing it with stoking the fires around these protests with the black.
Niger, let's take that into account then, but let's go past this now, because we have now seen riots / protests, whatever you want to call them. They're not riots, they're protests here. They're not peaceful. We've had people throwing trash cans. We've had a professor from a New York college who was one of the guys who was arrested, who was found with a bag of hammers that he had brought here. So we're talking about people who are looking for violence here. They are looking for a reason to attack the cops and go after them. Whether it's black, white, blue, green, indifferent, whatever, how do we stop this, and how do we then create some sort of conversation, agreement, whatever, to get to the point where we're going to stop hearing about people that the only way to solve this is to kill the cops?
Well, the first thing that we have to do, and this is going to sound extremely partisan, but I don't mean it to be, it is only because the Democratic Party has been so degenerated that now you have as a mainstream article of faith playing the race card within the Democratic Party. You have Al Sharpton, who is now one of Obama's top advisors on matters of race.
But what's it going to take then for the Democrats? Excuse me, but we got to get to this. What will it then take? I agree with you, and many people do, about Al Sharpton and the fact that he seems to have an undue amount of influence here on the current administration. How then do we, somebody...
They got to be removed. They have to be defeated.
But how do we then... removing them is one thing. How do we then convince, whether it's black America or white America, that these people do not have their best interests at heart and are doing all they can to make sure that this protest, this movement, if you will, is hijacked?
We have to talk past the protest, particularly the violent protest, and talk to the silent majority within black America, the silent majority within white America, Latino America, Asian Americans that are not out there violently protesting. Okay?
Then how do we get that silent majority to stop being silent?
Well, the media has got to give more access and more voice to people like myself, people like Larry Elder, people like Roy Murdoch, people like Deneen Borelli. There's a phalanx of reasonable black conservatives and even black liberals that are reasonable and decent, that are not racial rabble rousers like Al Sharpton. But the fact of the matter is, liberal and conservative media have given the Sharptons and the Jesse Jacksons a disproportionate microphone. And here are the fruits of that behavior. Is
Al Sharpton the kind of guy who will destroy what black America has made in the last few decades?
Not just Sharpton, try the President of the United States. The President of the United States was brought into power largely because the American people who voted for him thought that he would be a person that would help us turn the page on the crass race politics of Al Sharpton. He has not only failed to turn the page, he has doubled down on that page. He is, as I've said repeatedly, this history will show that this president is the most racially divisive president since we had Woodrow Wilson, and Woodrow Wilson segregated the federal government.
It'll have to stay there. Niger, it's always a pleasure to have you on the show, my friend. We'll talk to you again very soon, and thank you.
You take care. Bye-bye.
All right, take care. Break, and we're back on MidPoint.